Elijah Williams was no stranger to early mornings. At just 12 years old, the young boy cherished the quiet solitude of dawn, when the world still slept, and he could escape the small, cluttered house he shared with his mother, Tamara. Living on the outskirts of town, near a winding river bordered by tall reeds and the occasional willow tree, Elijah often found peace in fishing. Armed with an old rod and a tin of worms, he would make his way to his favorite spot by the bridge. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. By the way, what city are you watching us from? Write it in the comments, we're curious. That morning was no different, or so he thought. The sun had yet to rise, and the sky was painted in hues of deep blue and gray. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the faint rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Elijah had just cast his line when the distant hum of an engine caught his attention. He turned to see a sleek black car approach the bridge above him. Elijah's curiosity piqued. It wasn't often that anyone drove by this early, and something about the car's slow, deliberate movements felt odd. He squinted as the vehicle came to a halt in the middle of the bridge. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in a sharp suit stepped out. Elijah instinctively crouched behind a bush, his heart pounding. He watched as the man walked to the rear door, opened it, and began pulling something, or someone, out of the car. Elijah's eyes widened in horror as he realized what was happening. The suited man dragged an older man, limp and unconscious, from the back seat. The older man's head hung at an awkward angle, blood staining the collar of his crisp white shirt. For a moment, Elijah froze, unable to process what he was seeing. Then, with chilling precision, the suited man heaved the older man over the bridge railing. The splash echoed through the still morning air as the unconscious body hit the water and began to sink. Elijah's instincts kicked in. He dropped his fishing rod and ran toward the riverbank. The current was swift, but he could see the man's body drifting downstream. Without a second thought, Elijah dove into the cold water. The river's icy grip nearly stole his breath, but he pushed forward, swimming as hard as he could. His small hands found the man's arm, and he struggled to pull him to the surface. The older man was heavy and unresponsive, but Elijah refused to let go. After what felt like an eternity, Elijah managed to drag the man to the shore. Gasping for air, he collapsed beside him. The older man's chest rose and fell faintly, but his face was pale, and a deep gash on his head continued to bleed. Elijah shook his shoulder, trying to wake him, but the man only groaned weakly. Elijah knew he couldn't leave him there. Summoning every ounce of strength, he got the man to his feet and slung the man's arm over his shoulder. Step by agonizing step, he guided the man away from the river, back toward his small house. The sun was just beginning to rise as Elijah approached the door. He kicked it open with his foot, startling his mother, who had been sipping her first cup of coffee. "Elijah!" Tamara exclaimed, jumping to her feet. "What happened?" "Mama, I need your help," Elijah panted. "I found him in the river. Someone tried to kill him." Tamara's years as a veterinarian had prepared her to act quickly in emergencies. Without hesitation, she helped Elijah lower the man onto the couch. She examined his wound, muttering under her breath as she gathered bandages and antiseptic. "Who is he?" Tamara asked, glancing at her son. "I don't know," Elijah admitted, still trembling. "But someone tried to kill him. I saw it happen." Tamara looked at the unconscious man, then back at her son. Fear and concern flashed across her face, but she said nothing more. For now, saving his life was all that mattered. As Elijah watched his mother work, he couldn't shake the image of the suited man on the bridge. The memory burned in his mind, and a chilling realization crept over him: whoever had tried to kill this man wasn't finished. Tamara worked quickly, cleaning the wound on the unconscious man's head and stopping the bleeding. Elijah watched, still shaken from what he had witnessed, as his mother stitched the gash with steady hands. Once the man was stabilized, Tamara draped a blanket over him and turned to her son. "Elijah," she said firmly, "you need to tell me everything you saw." Elijah recounted the events on the bridge, the black car, the man in the suit, and how he had dragged the unconscious victim from the vehicle and thrown him into the river. Tamara's face grew pale as she listened, but she stayed composed. "That man wasn't just left for dead," she said. "Whoever did this wanted to make sure no one would find him." The man remained unconscious for 2 days, his body weak from the trauma. Tamara kept watch over him, monitoring his vitals and keeping Elijah home from school to avoid questions. They agreed not to tell anyone for now, fearing what could happen if the people who had tried to kill him discovered he was alive. Finally, on the 3rd morning, the man stirred. His eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his gaze. Tamara rushed to his side. "Sir, you're safe," she said softly. "You're in my home. My son found you in the river and brought you here." The man tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse. Tamara offered him water, and he sipped it slowly. Where am I?" he rasped. Elijah stepped closer. "We're outside of town, near the river," he said. "I saw someone throw you off the bridge. I pulled you out." The man's face contorted as he tried to recall what had happened. He rubbed his temple, wincing from the pain. Slowly, fragments of memory began to return. "I was in a car," he said, his voice shaky. "With my brother. We were arguing about something." And then, his brow furrowed as he trailed off. "You don't have to rush," Tamara said. "Just rest for now." Over the next day, the man regained his strength and began piecing together the events that led to his near-death experience. He introduced himself as Victor Bennett, a wealthy businessman. As his memory cleared, he confided in Tamara and Elijah, his younger brother, Marcus, had betrayed him. Victor revealed that he had discovered Marcus embezzling millions from their family business, funneling the money into offshore accounts to fund illegal operations. When Victor confronted him, Marcus had pretended to agree to a settlement but instead had arranged to get rid of him permanently. Tamara and Elijah listened in stunned silence as Victor spoke. The reality of what they had become involved in hit them like a wave. "You saved my life," Victor said, looking at Elijah with gratitude. "But Marcus won't stop. If he finds out I'm alive, he'll try again, and he'll come after anyone who helped me." The weight of his words hung heavy in the room. Tamara knew they couldn't go to the police yet. Whoever Marcus was, he had the resources and power to stay a step ahead of the law. Victor made a decision that night. "I need to disappear," he said. "But first, I have to make sure the truth comes out. If anything happens to me, the evidence against Marcus must reach the authorities." He handed Tamara a flash drive containing incriminating files he had gathered on Marcus's operations. "If I don't survive," he said, "take this to the police. It's the only way to stop him." Tamara reluctantly agreed, though fear gripped her at the thought of what might happen. Victor left the house the next morning, determined to hide while gathering more evidence. But none of them knew that Marcus was already one step ahead, and closer than they imagined. 2 days after Victor left, Tamara and Elijah tried to return to their normal routine, but the tension in the house was palpable. Tamara kept checking the windows and locking the doors, while Elijah replayed the events on the bridge in his mind. Both knew that harboring Victor had placed them in grave danger. One afternoon, as Elijah walked home from school, the sight of a familiar black car parked down the street stopped him in his tracks. His stomach dropped. It was the same car from the bridge, the same car that had come to their house with Marcus days earlier. Elijah's instincts screamed danger. He ducked behind a row of bushes and observed. 2 men were sitting inside the car, their faces barely visible through the tinted windows. They weren't moving, but their presence was threatening enough. Summoning his courage, Elijah crept along a back path to avoid being seen and slipped through the side door of his house. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. "Mama," he called out softly. No answer. Elijah moved cautiously, his heart pounding. When he reached the living room, he froze. Tamara was tied to a chair, her face pale but defiant, just as before. Standing across from her was Marcus, his cold, menacing glare fixed on her. Behind him were the two men from the car. "Well, if it isn't our little hero," Marcus sneered as he noticed Elijah. "You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, kid." Before Elijah could react, one of the men grabbed him roughly and forced him to the floor. Marcus walked over, crouching to meet Elijah's eyes. "You think you're smart, saving my brother like that?" Marcus said, his voice venomous. "But you've just made things worse for yourself. Now, I need answers, and I'm not leaving without them." Tamara, despite her fear, shouted, "Leave him alone. He's just a child." Marcus ignored her and began questioning Elijah. Where was Victor? Had he been back to the house? Did they know where he was hiding? Elijah remained silent, his jaw clenched in defiance. Minutes dragged on as Marcus's frustration grew. He ordered his men to increase the pressure. But just as one of them moved toward Tamara, the sound of sirens filled the air. The men froze. Marcus turned toward the window, his face darkening. Moments later, the front door was kicked open, and a team of police officers stormed inside. "Freeze!" one of them shouted. Marcus and his men barely had time to react before they were wrestled to the ground and handcuffed. The room erupted in chaos as officers secured the scene. As Marcus was dragged out in handcuffs, Victor appeared in the doorway. He rushed to Tamara and Elijah, cutting Tamara free and pulling Elijah into a hug. "I'm so sorry you were dragged into this," Victor said, his voice thick with guilt. "But it's over now." Elijah looked up at Victor, his eyes wide. "How did you know?" Victor explained that he had been keeping a close watch on them, knowing Marcus might make another move. When he learned the black car had returned, he immediately alerted the police and set a trap. For the first time in days, Tamara and Elijah allowed themselves to breathe. Marcus was in custody, and the danger seemed to be over, for now. With Marcus and his men in custody, the tension in Tamara and Elijah's home finally lifted. The police stayed for hours, gathering statements and ensuring the family's safety. As night fell, Victor remained with them, a silent but comforting presence. The following morning, Victor approached Tamara with a solemn expression. He thanked her and Elijah for their bravery and kindness, knowing full well they had risked their lives to save him. "I owe you everything," Victor said, his voice steady. "You didn't just save my life, you gave me the chance to make things right." Victor handed Tamara a folded envelope. Inside was a check with a sum so large it made her hands tremble. "I can't accept this," Tamara said firmly, pushing the envelope back toward him. "You can, and you will," Victor replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You've given me more than I can ever repay. This is the least I can do to ensure you and Elijah have a better life." Tamara hesitated but finally nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. The weight of their struggles seemed to ease just slightly. But Victor wasn't done. A week later, he returned with another envelope. This time, it contained a formal letter of acceptance for Elijah into one of the country's best schools. All expenses paid, with a full scholarship personally arranged by Victor. When Elijah read the letter, his face lit up with excitement. "Is this real?" he asked. Victor smiled. "You have a bright future ahead of you. This is just the start. You've shown courage and compassion beyond your years, and you deserve every opportunity to succeed." As Elijah hugged Victor tightly, Tamara looked on with gratitude. This man, a stranger just weeks ago, had become a pivotal figure in their lives. Victor's story wasn't over, though. A few months later, the trial against Marcus began. Victor's testimony and the evidence he had gathered ensured a guilty verdict. Marcus was sentenced to decades in prison for his crimes, including attempted murder and fraud. Justice was served. For Tamara and Elijah, life slowly returned to normal, though it would never be the same. The events had left an indelible mark on them, but they were stronger for it. Elijah worked hard in school, determined to make the most of the opportunities Victor had given him. One evening, as the family sat together, Tamara turned to Elijah and said, "You saved a man's life that day, but you also saved ours. Never forget the power of doing what's right." Elijah nodded, a quiet determination in his eyes. He knew his journey was just beginning, but he was ready for whatever came next. The trial of Marcus Kane, Victor's younger brother, was a spectacle that gripped the public's attention. Media outlets covered the story relentlessly: the billionaire betrayed by his own blood, the attempted murder, and the web of financial crimes that Marcus had orchestrated. Victor took the stand during the trial, delivering a calm but damning testimony. He recounted the years of trust he had placed in Marcus, only to discover the betrayal hidden behind a veneer of brotherly loyalty. Evidence gathered from the records Victor's investigators had uncovered, offshore accounts, fraudulent transactions, and links to illegal operations, was presented in meticulous detail. Marcus's defense team argued that the attempted murder had been a moment of desperation, not a premeditated act. But the prosecution dismantled this claim, pointing to the meticulous planning behind the incident on the bridge and Marcus's knowledge that Victor had uncovered his crimes. In the end, the jury took little time to deliberate. Marcus was found guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of early parole. Victor sat in the courtroom, stoic but visibly relieved. Justice had been served, not just for him, but for everyone Marcus had exploited in his schemes. Meanwhile, Tamara and Elijah followed the trial from a distance. Though they weren't directly involved, they felt a deep sense of closure knowing that the man who had threatened their lives was finally behind bars. After the trial, Victor visited their modest home once more. This time, he carried a simple message. "It's over," he told them. "You're safe now. And because of you, I'm alive to see this day." Elijah smiled but asked the question lingering in his mind. "What happens now?" Victor's response was resolute. "Now, we rebuild. I'll rebuild my life, and you'll build the bright future you deserve. Justice doesn't erase what happened, but it gives us the chance to move forward." As Victor left that day, Tamara and Elijah felt a new chapter beginning in their lives. The storm had passed, and though the scars remained, they knew they had done what was right. Justice had been served, and they had played a part in ensuring it. Months after the trial, life began to settle into a peaceful rhythm for Tamara and Elijah. Their small home, once a place of modest means and quiet struggle, now held a sense of hope and possibility. The financial gift Victor had left them, a significant sum deposited into their account, had allowed Tamara to pay off debts and focus on her veterinary clinic, which was now thriving. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to their home, but this time it didn't evoke fear. Stepping out was Victor Kane, dressed in a casual suit, holding a sealed envelope. Elijah greeted him with curiosity. "Mr. Kane, what brings you back?" Victor smiled warmly and handed Elijah the envelope. "This is for you," he said. Inside, Elijah found an official letter from one of the country's most prestigious universities. It was a full scholarship offer for Elijah, covering tuition, housing, and living expenses. Elijah's eyes widened in disbelief as he read the details. "I wanted to ensure that your bravery didn't just save me, it also built a future for you," Victor explained. "This is a gift you've more than earned." Elijah, stunned, looked to his mother. Tamara's eyes welled with tears of pride and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. Victor nodded. "I owed you my life. The least I could do was help secure yours." Months later, Elijah stood on the campus of his new university, ready to begin a journey that once felt impossible. The challenges he had faced, the fear, the danger, the weight of injustice, had shaped him into someone who understood the value of courage and doing what was right. Victor continued to rebuild his life, ensuring his business was stronger and more ethical than before. He and Elijah kept in touch, forming a bond that transcended their initial, unlikely meeting. As the sun set over the university, Elijah stood tall, looking toward the future. His journey was far from over, but he was ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that he had made a difference, and that even the smallest acts of bravery could lead to a new beginning. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video to show your support.